Welcome to The Truth in This Art, your source for conversations at the intersection of arts, culture, and community. I am your host, Rob Lee, and I am excited to have you with us today. And I'm super excited to welcome my next guest, a neurodivergent artist known as the Acrylic Alchemist, whose work transforms pain into purpose through a unique process he calls Acrylic Alchemy. With over 100 exhibitions nationally and internationally, his art has found its way into the collections of celebrities and private collectors alike. Please welcome Michael Carini.
Pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story and hopefully connect with some artists out there.
Thank you. And this is going to be fun. I'm glad we were able to kind of shoot the breeze a little bit before we got into the main thing. Often people don't get a chance to connect. It's just like, all right, I need what I need. You're going to give me that right now.
Very much so. We live in this world of immediate gratification and now. And I think that what the art world really needs right now is connection. I think we need to get back to connection.
That's super important. And one of the things I want to level set as we start out, could you introduce yourself and give us a bit about your journey as an artist? We all have a story, and I want to hear a bit about yours.
I'll try not to ramble too much, but I am Michael Carini. I'm a San Diego-based artist. I do this full-time. I left the workforce, invested 100% in the dream, cut the parachute because I'm a big believer that the parachute prevents you from flying. It doesn't prevent you from falling, it prevents you from flying. So I'm all in on the dream. I don't always have all the answers, but I do a lot of artist support content, try to share my journey to help others find their voice. And that's what it's about for me. I'm a neurodivergent artist with Tourette's. I had a traumatic brain injury last year. And I've never really felt like there's a place for me in this world. And I still often don't feel like that, but my art allows me to create one. And so I want to help others on that journey as well.
Thank you. That's and we'll dive a bit further into it. Like to give a bit of a taste. I call it like the trailer in the beginning. So if you will, talk a bit about some of your early experiences. And I really like that point you were making about the parachute prevents you from flying. I like that. That's really good. But could you tell us a little bit about some of your early experiences, both in life and in art, that kind of set you on a path that you're on today? Like, I was a creative kid. I wanted to be an illustrator, and illustration is not what I do. I still love it. I still appreciate it. I like comics and all, but that's not what I do. I do this. And I guess I stumbled upon this as a medium, as an outlet, perhaps really in high school. So that's, where the line starts, if you will. So for you, sort of early experiences, what comes to mind when you think of art, when you think of like the life and the path that you're on?
My entire life, I've always kind of felt like I don't belong here, like there's not a place for me. And it does tie back to that being neurodivergent. But as a child, you don't really know or understand what that means. And it wasn't really until the past couple of years that I started to realize that a lot of the decisions I made and the reason I do a lot of the things that I do is because of that and because I don't think the way that a lot of other people do. And so not feeling like I had a place, I always found, like I said, a place that I could create my own place within the art. And I seemed to be recognized pretty early on. I remember I was probably 5-6 years old and I did a coloring contest at Ralph's. And I won concert tickets to see the Ninja Turtles in concert at the Sports Arena in San Diego. So those are these core memories that kind of stick with you throughout life. So I moved forward, but I have that core memory. And then we come up on high school and I struggled a lot with depression, suicide, issues of that. I came from a background, a lot of bad stuff going on at home, and I just never really felt safe. I came from a blue collar family, did not have a lot of resources, did not have a lot of money. I won a couple of awards in high school from art. I was still getting recognition for that. I had my first work in a museum actually before high school in '98 and a student show at the San Diego Museum of Art. So every week I run past the San Diego Museum of Art and touch the pillars and say, my work's going to be back in there again. But again, that was one of those core memories where you think, well, maybe there's some value to me, even though I often don't feel like I have any value. And then high school won a couple more awards. And I said, you know what? I still want to be an artist. I didn't say I want to become an artist because I believe that I was born an artist. But what happens is life often conditions it out of you, or people beat it out of you. Sometimes it's people that don't like you. Sometimes it's your friends and family. And I remember my family. I can't say that my family wasn't supportive, but as a blue collar family that is not artistic and that doesn't understand art and that doesn't really come to my shows, they said, hey, if you want to do this, do it, but you're on your own.
Yeah.
And so I had to put myself through school. I went to Loyola Marymount. I worked 3 jobs, did an apprenticeship, did not go to a single party. I was just nose to the ground, working my way through. But it's because I knew I was going to have to hustle if I wanted to do anything. But coming from that blue collar family, I was a janitor when I was 14, working the 3 jobs during college. I worked the trash shift at Vaughn's. I had to go there when it was still dark out and cut all the spoiled meats and stuff like that. So it was hard for me to think that I could really reach a big dream, but I held on to the dream. And
Yeah.
I don't want to go on too much about this because I want to be able to dive into the things that you want to talk about. But I never gave up on the dream.
Yeah.
And once I decided to fully commit to the dream and cut that parachute, that's when the doors really started to open.
That's so important. As I think about, just some of those connection points, that's how I receive it. Like, I had the support, but it was more like, we don't know what you do, but we love it because we love you. It was more of that for my family. And it's definitely like, yeah, like Junior, because I'm a Junior. Yeah, man, Junior, he runs a radio station. I was like, I don't do that at all, but thank you. Or even when I wanted to go into illustration as a kid, it's just like art supplies were always the thing, but it wasn't like, hey, let's go to this museum. That's just not what we did. But it
Yeah.
was this version of support. And yeah, I love that point of not giving up on the dream and, you know, sort of figuring it out. Like we get these points where as we get older, maybe it's a Patton Oswalt joke, the whole thing about tens. Every time you hit 10 years, it's a new sort of milestone. You get one less birthday or what have you. And it's sort of this thing where I run into it even now, approaching 40. Yeah, well, you haven't made the bag yet, or where are you going to take this podcasting thing? Don't you feel like you're wasting your time a little bit? And it's like, well, I'm enjoying it. And so if I'm enjoying it and I'm still doing it, isn't that successful? It's that sort of adult version of kind of beating the dream out of you, if you will.
Yeah, and I looked at it as a benchmark too. When I just hit 40, I was experiencing and feeling a lot of the things you just described, but I also said, okay, 40, I haven't done some of these things. Now's the time to make it happen. Let's make it happen. Let's do this thing. Okay, what do we got to do to make this happen now?
Yeah. You got to be an evangelist for yourself, almost like in an irrational confidence about it. And
Yep.
for a while in doing this, and this is, as I was sharing with you before we got started, this is so different than what I've done. It's a lot of different moving parts, as you touched on when before we got started. You have like a normal rhythm. When you work with a person regularly, what their quirks are, their idiosyncrasies, all of that stuff. You know what their schedule looks like. But when it's just like, all right, I got 4 interviews today. One person's going to show up an hour late. This person's not going to give me the stuff I need. And it's juggling multiple things. And it's a whole new thing. And it's all of this almost information that's out there for you to almost quit or almost give up. But you don't, because you're chasing the dream. You're chasing that unique thing that is maybe your curiosity, maybe your process. And speaking of this is a ham-fisted segue. Let's talk about your process a little bit. I
Well,
read
hey,
about
ham-fisted segues are my thing. That's my jam. So we can go like down the rabbit hole, but yeah, whatever you want, we can go there. So I mean, and that's the big thing about me is that I think that in a sense you kind of have to be willing to take the segues in life. You have to be willing to kind of adapt and adjust. We talked about that a little bit too before we got on here. Of life is going to hit you with these things, these obstacles, and a door closed just means okay, that door is closed. Now I can focus my energy on the door that is open. So it all comes down to how you choose to interpret things. And when you have the hunger for it, you find a way to make it work. And as an artist, I feel blessed because artists, we're creative people. So we find creative solutions. So I definitely feel down on myself at times. And sometimes I do feel hopeless at times. I do feel like, oh, geez, I'm going backwards, or I should be here by now, or I did this before, and I feel like I'm going in the opposite direction. But I do have this sort of eternal optimism and hope, and the idea that if I just keep going, there is a possibility that it might just work out. But if I quit or go in the other direction, or the road that others take, then I'm guaranteed to fail.
Talk a bit about this. And this is a good question, I think, like, because I've been experiencing, I've been feeling this, that feeling of hope, like, especially when you're doing something creative, like, I'll have an awareness like, man, I got a lot of interviews this week. It's not looked at like it's a lot of work this week. It's like I have a lot of times where I need to block out time to do X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't feel like work. It's different than if I got to go to work, man, I got a lot of projects to work on. That feels like work. But when it's this and I got a good rhythm and a good week going, I have this feeling of like hopefulness and almost like, man, I get to stunt and show what I know how to do again, like multiple times. So I want to ask you about your process in a moment, but talk about that a little bit, sort of that feeling of hope and where that comes from, just on a day to day, it's on a human level.
I think it comes down to I want more and I want to show people it's possible. And you just described it perfectly. I've had a lot of things lately that feel like they're not going right. The art market's tough right now. People are not spending a lot of money. The economy's down. Art's the first thing that people cut. As a full-time artist, I'm feeling it. I live in San Diego. Cost of living is high here. But I had 2 art openings Saturday night. And before that, I was kind of feeling down, but I was like, okay, but I have something coming up, that's exciting. So go to the art openings and I have a couple really good exchanges with people. And I think that everybody wants to have hope. And so for me, it doesn't take a lot. Just a good interaction with somebody, a good conversation with somebody feeds me.
Yeah.
For a long time. Like I can take it a long time. I can put in the work, I can hustle, and I can go off of that because I want to make this happen. I want this more than anything. I want to succeed more than I'm willing to fail. I mean, failing is easy. It's easy to let go and just say, hey, I can't do this. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to take the easy road. I want to do the hard thing. And you have to do the hard things to get where people haven't been. If you do the same things that other people have done, you're only going to get to where those people have been. So you have to be willing to embrace that. And I think that that's where I embrace now the neurodivergent aspect. That is also my strength. It's what allows me to hyper focus in and just say, hey, I'm going to be relentless on this. And I'm somebody that, as I mentioned, struggled with depression, suicide. I didn't learn until I was 28 years old that my father actually committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm adopted. So I didn't learn that until I was 28. And at the time, I was kind of having those feelings myself. And once I learned about that, it actually sent me in the other direction. I'm like, okay, I don't want to I don't want to live that life. I don't want to be that. So I'm going to hold on just because now, and it has been my firm belief that if I just keep fighting and I don't give up, that there's always hope. And the only way to lose that hope is to just give up. You give up, there is no hope. But if you keep going, it may be small, but the hope is still out there.
It's a really good point. And thank you for sharing that. It's, I taught a class in podcasting in the last, 6 months. And we talked a little bit about being vulnerable on podcasts. And just when folks are sharing their story and like the realness behind it, we haven't dove into your art yet. And we were talking about like the real life components about it. And, that's great. And one thing that I'll share before moving to this next question that aligns with what you said there a second ago. So, it's no secret, right, that Rocky IV is one of my favorite movies, right?
Good movie.
That's when Rocky saved us from the Russians. And it came out the year I was born. So, I referenced that movie a lot in podcasts. I did a movie night talking about it, and I did a podcast dedicated to old movies, and that was one of the movies featured. And I think during the pandemic, they had when it was at its height, maybe 2020 or 2021, but I think it was 2020, Stallone was releasing sort of the director's cut of Rocky IV. And I started following him. I just remember he had this quote that he would say all the time, just keep punching. And that's stuck with me when it goes to like, it sucks today, or this is whack, or whatever. This episode didn't go good. Well, this one's going great, but that episode didn't go good. Just keep on punching. That's just what it is for me. So I want to move into this question. You developed a unique process called Acrylic Alchemy. Can you explain what it is and, sort of what's baked into it, sort of that approach? Because I'm just turning pain into purpose. So talk a bit about that.
So 2002, 2006, I was at Loyola Marymount, and I was a big fan of a show called Full Metal Alchemist. And so I was blessed to be able to take a lot of independent studies. So while I was up there in LA, a lot of times I'd have a reverse schedule where I would sleep all day. I'd get up at night, I'd have a smoothie, some snacks, and I would just paint all night while watching anime. And it was great. That was the life. And I was obsessed with the show. I loved it. I loved the emotional connection, the vulnerability in the show. And so 2009 had an assault and battery that gave me a concussion, multiple facial fractures, and severe eye trauma. And this is what I saw flashing through my head. So this represents life growing from death. And that's essentially when I say Acrylic Alchemy was born. And the principal idea behind it is equivalent exchange, and the idea that I will use my pain to create something positive and beautiful for the world, because I was somebody that has had a lot of trauma, and it's easy to lose yourself in the trauma. It's easy to lose yourself in the pain and all the difficult things, all the obstacles, all the shit that happens to us in life, all the bad things. And it still gets to me at times, but if you can find a way to use it, you can take away the power that it has over you. And so I started putting all that in the work. So you had mentioned, hey, we've talked a lot about life, but we haven't talked about art. But my art is really just my life. I'm a storyteller. I put all my emotions, all my feelings into the work. So whatever I'm feeling, good or bad, I put it into the work. I pull it out. So I pull it out of me so that I can heal. And I have a collection called my Open Wounds collection. And the idea is that sometimes you need to tear yourself open and expose your wounds so they can breathe and heal. If you leave it inside of you, it'll eat you alive. Sometimes you've got to pull that stuff out of you. And why not put it in the art where other people can connect with it and you can actually turn it into something beautiful? And I didn't want to allow all these situations to have that power over me. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take back the power and I'm going to decide that I'm in control.
Wow. Wow. That's, I mean, let me guess. You an Aquarius, man? Like, what's going on? Because there's too many overlaps that are there. Because here's the thing. Full Metal Alchemist, it's a running bit that, my partner, she'll say like, yeah, because it's about brothers. It's always that because I have a brother and everything is connected to that. But it's, Full Metal Alchemist, Supernatural, and New Japan Pro Wrestling. When I had these really big periods of like depression and just I'm out of it, for whatever reason, those things brought me back. It was like a cup of coffee in the morning. It's like I am up and I'm here. And those things, those medias, they hold a special place for me. So when you mentioned it, my mind lit up because when I saw like alchemy in your style, I was like, hold up. It's like, is there gonna be a Full Metal Alchemy? You said it's equivalent exchange. I was like, look, I've used that on a date in the past.
Well, and professional wrestling for me too. And I think it's the storytelling. It's something that's reliable. It's something that's consistent. It's something that we can hold on to. And sometimes that's all we need is we just need something to hold on to. Even if it just may take 30 seconds. Sometimes we just got to work through that 30 seconds. And sometimes we just need to be able to survive, to fight another day. And I know what that feels like, to feel like I don't have anything to hold on to right now. So that's why I try to be so vulnerable in my work, is I want to give somebody else that thing that they may need to hold on for that couple seconds to get past that super dark point. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy afterwards, but to just carry them through so they can continue to fight this difficult battle.
Thank you. So when you're in a spot like coming up on 16 years, it'll be 16 years in February. So looking at it, I'll be 40 in January, 16 years in February. That means I've been podcasting since my 20s, 30s, and going into 40s. You're a very different person over that time. Maybe, I hope. And, I know folks will listen and they'll say, yeah, I remember you were talking about this sort of stuff and you've matured or you've regressed or whatever it might be. But it's me being me. I'm sharing, as you were talking about, like, you're a storyteller. You're sharing the real thing and get your East Coast sentiment, as you touched on before we got started. It's very much you. So how do you like strike that balance when capturing sort of these very personal and these raw emotions with the energy associated with it while still being relatable to a broad audience?
I would say that I'm not relatable to a broad audience, and I would say that I shouldn't be relatable to a broad audience because I am not necessarily for them. And this has been a difficult thing because as an artist, it's like you want to be successful. You want to do big things. I had an agency at one point. I thought I was going to be working with a bunch of big companies and it didn't happen and it kind of hurt me. And I had to think about it. I said, well, I don't think like everybody. I don't speak like everybody. I don't do the things that everybody does. I am neurodivergent. I do think differently. My brain works differently. And once I just started focusing on being myself, I find that that's when I'm the happiest because it's so easy to lose yourself in trying to find that balance. So sometimes what you need to do is not be balanced. Everybody talks about balance, and balance can be a great thing for a lot of people. For me, it is not. I have to be authentically myself, and I may not reach everybody, but I will reach the right people. And one of the things I've talked about a lot lately is that your art will not be for everybody. but make sure that your art is for you. Because if you're being authentic, people will connect with that. There will be somebody out there. Your people are out there. Sometimes you just got to find them. But if you're making work that's really not you, that your soul, your heart's not in, it's going to be felt. And the person that's going to feel it the most is going to be you. And then you're not really doing what you want to do. You're just a fragment of something.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. It's a good distinction there. Like, you got to keep what makes you unique. You got to keep what makes you feel like connected to purpose. So, when I get these gigs that'll pop up, hey, we're looking for a podcaster. I was like, sure. Or we're looking for someone to document this and so on. I was like, well, I do this. I don't really do that. And at a point early on, when it's a notion of getting success. Oh, the people are asking about me. Ooh, I'm pretty. This is great.
Yeah.
And wanting to give them what I think they're looking for. And after a few of those instances where it doesn't work out the way that I would hope or the way that I was anticipating, and then I feel like, I kind of sold myself short. I was like, what's the unique quality that makes me me? And I was just like, nah, now I'm very much protective of it. You brought me on for what I do, not the sort of other way around. And being protective of that, I think that's a really important distinction, that you're not going to be for everybody. Maybe some of those gigs and maybe some of those guests, they don't come on. It's like, well, maybe they'll catch up later. That's the way I start looking at it.
Yeah, I think that that's true. And go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. And that's one of the things that I deal with in the art world. I do a lot of the artist support talks, and I just got some new gallery relationships. And a lot of times people will be like, oh, you work with a bunch of galleries, you must be so successful. Well, I mean, I do some things, but it all comes down to the quality of the relationships. And not every relationship is going to be a good relationship. It's like relationships with a significant other. There are some very toxic relationships that are not good for you, that hold you back. Yeah. And same thing with the galleries. There's opportunities where you can build a good relationship. I have a couple that I really, really love working with. There's a couple I'm trying out right now, and I'm still kind of on the fence because I'm like, okay, are we really going to be a good match? Because it's so easy in the initial stages to pretend that phase of the honeymoon period, and people just trying to say what they think others want to hear as opposed to being genuine.
Yeah. So I want to move into this piece right here. Like you touched on earlier, sort of, what some people would deem as just, hey, success, your work is being shown in this museum. And you touched on a moment ago, sort of the gallery relationships and, having, your work in collections of celebrities and private collectors. So, what keeps you grounded when you have one of those really like, wow, yeah, they bought one of my pieces. This is really cool. Or, what keeps you evolving? What keeps you grounded? What keeps you evolving as, and as an artist at this stage?
Well, there are times that I wasn't so grounded, and there were times that the ego did get a little out of check. When I was a little younger, probably about 10 years ago, I was moving a good amount of work, doing pretty well, and I started to feel pretty good about myself and start to think that I was something special. And then life will humble you. And I'm glad that it did humble me, though, because I think that I'm a better version of myself in many ways right now. Not in all ways, because, there's things that go in different directions. But overall, I think that I do have more humility now. And I think that that's an important thing to remember, that I'm not better than any other artist out there. Even though I do some stuff, I'm not better than any artist out there. I'm not better than some kid that picks up a crayon and starts authentically sharing a story and coloring. I'm not better than anybody. I'm just somebody that works hard and is trying to share my story.
I like that point where, and I like the way you were just gonna say, I do some things. I responded the same way. It was like, hey man, you're successful. You're on this billboard. I've been on a thing. I don't know.
Well, one of the things I did that kind of people are like, well, you did what? Is there's a thing that artists usually have to have called a CV, a curriculum vitae, or however you pronounce it. It's basically like your artist resume. It shows all your shows, all your press, all that stuff. It's just this hyperinflated document of BS that ends up being 20 pages long. So in 2020, I set mine on fire. Oof. Like literally set it on fire and collected the ashes and worked them into a painting. And so now when I work with galleries and they say, we need your CV, I send them a CV, a digital document that it says 2020, set my CV on fire, because what I've done in the past doesn't matter. What matters is what I'm doing today. And I'm a big believer that people get complacent or comfortable. They have a little bit of success and they think, oh, well, I've done stuff, I'm special. I am not special. I will never be special. I think I can do some special things, though, but I'm always putting in work. Every single day I'm putting in the work, and I want to be a hustler until the day that I die. So I don't want to rest on the things that I did before. I want people to look at what I'm doing right now, and you judge me based off that. You decide if you want to work with me based off that. If you don't want to work with me, That's okay. Not everybody's for me. I'm not going to be for everybody. Maybe you don't want to work with me, but somebody out there will want to work with me. And one of the galleries that I'm working with right now, she loves emotional work. She said, Michael, just a question on your CV. It says you set it on fire. Um, is that what you want me to put up? I'm like, well, that's what it is. She's like, well, I'm going to put on your CV the show that you have at our gallery right now, but I'll kind of leave it as is otherwise. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, I'm kind of firm on it. I've said, hey, I'm not going to go back and try to figure out what other shows or press I had in the past 4 or 5 years. I made a statement, and that's what artists are supposed to do. We're catalysts for change. I'm making a statement. My statement is that I want to be judged on what I'm doing today and not this bullshit system of like resumes and whatnot. And so look at me, and if I'm for you, I'm for you. If I'm not for you, I'm not for you.
That's a really great point, and it touches on this one item I had, and I'll backdoor into it. Sort of. I read that George Carlin used to get rid of his old jokes. As a means to kind of stay in practice, stay in the joke writing practice. And earlier in doing this podcast, every like 6 months, I would just get rid of my questions. As a habit of not recycling the old insights and really like if this is curious, if you're curious about this particular insight, you'll arrive back to it because you are always going to have that question. It's just the artists are different. And and I think it allows for a deeper, more refined version of thinking and approach to the questions or approach to the work overall. And when I read that you set your CV on fire, I was just like, metal. And it's something about that. It's again like, look, I'm not doing the safety net. I'm not doing the parachute. I'm not, playing by these rules. And, one of the things, and it's funny, when I do this, I'll have guests come on, and a lot of times, we're trying to connect. We're, as we touched on, there's a vulnerability to it. There's, this is my art project, if you will. And, I'm very, cautious as to who I bring on and who I invite on, because there are a lot of folks that come into the space, which feels really weird to say, but come into the space and then they're not supportive of their own interviews. But this is the thing that's really interesting. Every now and again, I'll say, all right, I'm just going to put up the most recent content, the last 50 episodes for sake of argument. And then suddenly, from someone who didn't respond to me when I let them know the episode dropped or whatever, hey, bro, I noticed that the episode isn't on bop, bop, bop. And I was like, well, yeah, I get rid of my old stuff. That interview's from 2 years ago. Why do you care about it now? You didn't care about it when it came out. It's very interesting. And I find at times folks kind of shoot themselves in their own foot, but I'm doing it in an effort to let me stay current. Have I gotten any better? I can look back and listen to it to see like, all right, because there are instances where maybe I've interviewed the same guest twice in the span of 5 years. And it's just like, oh, okay, this was a better question. This was a better interview. Or I kind of asked that question again, but kind of seeing what that growth is. But to your point, I'm trying to see where I'm at now and judging me versus me, I suppose.
Yeah, and it's a matter of, like you said, it's thinking over regurgitating and living over existing. And I think that too many of us have just got trapped in the system of, oh, it's Monday. I get up, I go to work, I drive to work, 9 to 5, I punch a clock. And I just got to a point where I was at the point that I was going to give up on life in 2019. I had gone through the system. I had done it. It seemed like I was going backwards. I'm like, you know what? I'm ready to give up on life. So why not just cut the parachute and go all in on the dream? And if I fail miserably, at least I can fail going after what I really want and believe in. And in failing there, at least there's a sense of success in that failure. There was no success for me, and even the success of the life that wasn't meant for me.
Right. Yeah, it's always trying to like find that balance. And when you see folks, and I say balance in this way, where you see folks who they feel like they're 1 foot in, they feel like they're kind of like dipping a toe in, and like I get very what's the word I want to use? I get very sensitive to folks in the whole podcast realm, where it's like I do this. And I see folks, yeah, I could just drop in. It's a marketing tactic. It's this, it's that. It's an influencer thing. And I'm like, it's not that. It's not to say that it's not always that. It can be that, but what is your intent? What is your focus? What is your reason? Because it's what folks find. It's a lot of work that goes into it. So you can't BS and say, yeah, I can just dabble in it. And, I try to, and we talked about this a little bit before we got started. I try to configure my life around it to make like, hey, I'm a podcaster, I identify in that way that does this, this, and this. Part of that is the day job. Part of that is the fitness thing. Part of that is the relationship, friendship, social things, all of that stuff. But if we're doing an SEO search, podcast is the first thing in that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, again, I don't pass judgment on anybody. I understand why people want to have comfort. It's scary, and I'm in a situation where I'm not married. I don't have kids. It's just me, so I can take these. So I understand people
Yeah.
don't want to take those risks in other situations, but I have to say that once I committed, that's when things changed. Once there was no plan B. Because even a couple months ago, the art market, like I said, it's been brutal across the board. A lot of people are trying to pretend like it's not, but I've talked to my galleries across the country, I've talked to other artists across the country, and they're all saying the same thing, that the market definitely seems to be down for the vast majority of us. So that's the reality of the situation. So I was thinking, well, at 40 years old, what could I do? I used to work in sales in a corporate level and make some good money, but then I was making less money at the time that I left, which is why I left. I'm like, why am I going backwards in life? So now at 40 years old, could I go back and work a minimum wage paying job, start at the bottom, have to go punch a clock, drive there, listen to somebody else's nonsense rather than controlling my own schedule, having to grind a little bit harder, but knowing that on any given day I could wake up and I could sell a painting for $1,000, $5,000, maybe $10,000, $20,000. And then last week, I did sell a piece for $1,000. And then I had, after my show this past week, somebody else buy a piece for $1,100. And so I'm not, again, numbers are just numbers. So I'm not trying to say, like, don't think anything of that. If you sell your work for less, if you sell your work for more, just do your thing. But just then I was like, see, this is why I need to stay the course, because I can create something that I can sell for far more while being able to better manage my health and wellness. Because that's the thing, is when I left the workforce, I could so much better manage my mental health and my physical health. Like, every day starts off with me. Yeah, I do the social media thing. I don't particularly like it, but you know what? It's part of the hustle. Sometimes the answers you seek are in the work that you're avoiding. So a lot of people out there are like, well, I want to be a successful artist, but they don't promote their work. So I don't like being on social media, despite how it may come across. I'm actually a big time introvert that keeps to myself and doesn't leave the house for the most part. But I get up, I do my social media on every platform every single day. I do my artist support content. Then I go hit the gym for 2 to 3 hours, or I go for my run 6 days a week. That's my routine. And then I come back, and like you talked about doing the podcast, then I do the studio work and I do the painting, and 24 hours a day I'm doing the communication. Like, if somebody contacts me from another part of the world or another city, another country, I have to close the deal when I got to close the deal. So it's a 24-hour/7 thing. So I'm hustling all the time, but I would rather hustle for the thing that I want and hustle towards my dream than towards somebody else's, because you're either working towards your dream or you're working towards somebody else's. And you can try to say otherwise, but if you really look at things, that's the truth.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I want to touch on. I got two more questions. I want to touch on, because there is this. I came across this phrase. Artistic act of sacrifice. I often think of art and creative work always don't get the recognition that it deserves. Of there's sacrifice that goes in it. It's not, sometimes it's literal, but it's not, and sometimes it's figurative, but there's blood that goes into some of these things. It's physically taxing for some, emotionally draining, and can be financially burdensome. I had a conversation recently with an artist who was talking about some of the weird financial games that happen of, hey, bring your stuff here, sure, but at your expense. And it's like,
Pay to
okay.
play situations and vanity galleries. Yeah, there's a lot of deception, and there's people trying to manage and run the market the ways that they can. So so I get it, but yeah, it's easy to be led astray.
And I encounter it in this where, very very similar, where I'm bucketed as an artist or this or that, but it's sort of like, how are we going to pay you, and how can we position you at the most advantageous way? So I find a lot of times it's like, I show up, I invest, I sacrifice, if you will, and we'll get you in the back end. Sure. And it's just like, but if I were a performer, or I find that when me, or let's say an artist that I'm thinking of, that when I have this point, comes with a very business mindset, like, here's a contract, here's some deliverables, here's some dates. Oh, no, no, we usually don't work in that way. But if you will, could you talk a little bit about some of those sacrifices that from your vantage point that you've made or you've heard of other artists that make that just often we don't really think about?
Do you mean more so in the artwork creation or in a different sense?
In the artwork creation and even sort of like the promotion side of that full like trajectory, that full process, because I'm talking about sort of the being out there and like how do you get your stuff out there. You might have to, if you're working a day job, what have you, I gotta take this day off, I gotta do this event because it's good for my career. But also, if this microphone stops working, I got to choose like, all right, mortgages next week. What are we doing? and thinking about how I'm going to recalibrate some of those things. And I imagine, sometimes people making choices on what am I eating versus do I have paint?
Yeah, I've had to make that choice before. And referring specifically to the artwork is
Sure.
you sacrifice the soul, you put your heart, your energy into the work. And I think that, again, if you are completely vulnerable in your work and you put whatever you're feeling into it, good, bad, whatever. A lot of artists talk about, oh, I have a creative block, I'm feeling depressed, I don't feel like creating. And they say, well, how do I get out of that? And I say, the truth is, you're not going to like the answer is you got to get to work. You got to do the thing. And the easy way to do that, or not easy way, but the easiest way to do that is to warm up your creative muscles the same way that you would warm up the body. So do a little light priming or some sanding or some color mixing. But whatever you're feeling, if you're feeling anxiety or blocked up, put that feeling of being blocked up in the work. And if you're honest, if you're vulnerable, if you put your soul in the work, there's value there. Will everybody see that? Absolutely not. But the right people will see you. And so I trust that if I tell the authentic story, make the authentic work, that eventually I will connect with the right people. Like this past weekend at my exhibition, there was a young lady that came up to me. She said, my boyfriend has one of your works. He's moving to Chicago and he's sending the piece there. And she showed me the piece. It was a piece that depicted an angel embracing a suicide victim at the moment of impact. So it was a very deep, dark piece, a lot of emotion, very intense piece that I created. And the guy that had it wanted his girlfriend to come say hi to me and wanted her to get a picture with me. And he felt so connected to the work and he knew the story behind it. And so there were times recently where I questioned myself. I said, well, does it maybe scare people away? Because when you think about work that's commercial friendly, people like stuff that's not threatening, stuff that's not going to make them think too much, stuff that's kind of like a secondary thought. It's passive. It's not anything that's going to really turn their world upside down. And I make a lot of the work that will turn your world upside down if you're willing to dive into it. But I have this understanding that not everybody will see it. There's a lot of people that go through life with blinders on, but I put the Easter eggs in there for the people that are willing to dive deeper, and I just trust in that process. But it does, as you mentioned, there's a time where very recently I had to deal with the very real reality of me potentially being homeless because the market's been that bad. And I said, well, you know what? And that's why I was thinking about, well, do I go get the minimum wage paying job? And I said, if I go get the minimum wage paying job, I will be stuck there forever and I will still not be able to pay my bills. So if I'm still not going to be able to pay my bills, I would rather quite literally die fighting for the thing that I want and that I believe in. And I will go out like that if I have to go out like that. And so I have had to choose at times, am I going to buy the supplies and cut back on the amount of meals that I eat during the day? And there have been times that I did eat less because I had to choose between those things. There was a time that the only thing that I had was a journal that I could paint words in. I only had one. I had my black paint and I had my journal, and I couldn't afford to get anything else. And so for a while, that had to suffice for my creative outlet. I have an entire body of work that is essentially just my recycled paint palettes. And I created that collection, what I call my Beautiful Accidents collection, based on the Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi and shibui, because there were times that I couldn't afford to get anything else. And so I had to create art out of what I had. And so a number of times I've had to adapt and find the creative solution to sustain and to survive. I've had to give up a lot of things. I've had to make a lot of difficult choices. I don't go out. I don't party. I don't do a lot of the things that other people do. I have my schedule that is, like I said, I do my social media, I go out, I do my workout, I come back and I do the art thing. I am committed to the dream above anything else. And I've even told my partner in life that painting will always be my mistress. I will always put the art before anything else. And so I acknowledge that I cannot be the best partner in that regard. And I'm very honest and candid about that because I don't want to create problems for somebody else. And I want to be honest about who I am and what my purpose is, what my calling is in this world, and where the majority of my energy needs to go, because people may come and go. And I have at times been on this journey and have tried to invest in that other thing, in those relationships, and had people suck me of my good energy because they loved the romantic idea of the artist, only to turn me on my head and leave me broken and have to rebuild. And so I said, for this reason, I need to make sure that I'm always putting the art first. And so that is the sacrifice. That is a sacrifice that I make.
It's a good point. And then, because everything is a pop culture reference for me, Terrence Fletcher would really appreciate you. A little
Well,
whiplash reference.
appreciated.
A little whiplash reference in his 10th anniversary. Yeah. Yeah, I joke about it. I say this. I've said this a lot on the podcast. Before I move into this last question, I just say, like, podcasting has been the most stable long-term relationship I've ever been in.
Yeah.
And it is the key. It's a relationship. Like, sure, there's a movement and stuff because, it's never, it can be taxing. You can do all of those things, but it's always there. It's always there. And, being committed to it and sticking with it and putting it first, considering another person, they got to be real special. Like I was touching on earlier of, like, I'm very mindful of where I put my time at.
Yeah.
But that situation, that person, whatever it is, has to be really special if I have something booked or if I'm doing something related to podcasting. I travel for this. I'm doing events for this, all to sort of move that needle. And that's what's in front. And then everything else is just kind of like, all right, everything else is going to fall into place because this is set. That's the priority.
And you have to know who you are. You have to know what your purpose is, what your intent is. You have to move with intention. And I find that when I move with intention, that's when things open up. And then, yeah, you have to work the other things around it. But you will do things because they are your priority. And the things that you don't do, you can say what you want to say. People have excuses, but if it's a priority, you do it.
Yeah.
Simple as that. It is what it is.
I tried to do this thing. I've done it for a few different times because I'm a shy extrovert. I had to realize that, right? And I used to think I'm just an introvert. It's like, nah, you get some energy from people. It's just like, but not everybody. And it's very, at times, right? And, it was recent where my attendance was requested by multiple people in multiple places, all related to some work I've did. And it's just like, I can do a lot of stuff, and I did a lot of interviews, and it was just like, hey, we want you to come out to this event you helped us promote. And I was like, that's fine. That's great. But I just want to be a recluse right now. I just want to, like, let the beard grow out, Alan Moore, that thing. And, I don't want to go to all of these things. But for me, and maybe this is my own little notion, but the notion of success in that regard is at least there's consideration. I appreciate the invite. I'm probably not going to show up because Fullmetal Alchemist is on and I want to rewatch. Like, what are we doing? So that's one of the things.
Well, for me as an artist, it's a blessing and a curse because I can get away with some stuff.
Yeah.
And I joke with my partner about that. I'm like, I don't know that it's good that I'm able to get away with certain things as an artist because I may lean into that, like the idea of being myself. And I mean, I do the very serious stuff where I talk about mental health, I talk about suicide, but I also do a lot of joking stuff. And part of that's to kind of balance that out because it does get very dark very quickly.
Yeah.
But I do some stuff where people might look at me and be like, this guy is out there. But I mean, I get away with it because I'm an artist and I figure, hey, we got to shake things up.
Yeah, it's sort of shaking what that status quo looks like. And I want to be able to do that a bit more. Like, as I think about where I'm refining what this is, and, as I shared, before we started, that, trimming down sort of the amount that I'm doing. And it's not of disinterest of this particular thing, of this particular podcast. It's more of, I'm interested in a litany of other things. Like, I want to get back to the movie podcast. That's why I'm able to flex sort of those comedic and improvisational like muscles or what have you, and really get into the weeds and nerd out on some stuff that I really enjoy and nerd out on the fandom side of things. And this is fun. This is always super enjoyable, but this is definitely structured in a way. The conversation piece is very fun. The things around it have more structure than, let's say, the movie podcast or just doing a screening and just connecting, in that way. It's something about that I really, really dig. And, not having an expectation, kind of touching on what you were saying about, I can kind of do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, I can do a little bit of everything. that's the thing that's freedom. It's not having a governor on you. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, well, I'm going to do this. This is what I want to do.
Well, since you mentioned a movie podcast, I need your advice. So the thing I do every Tuesday as part of my mental health routine is I go to the movies because it's only $7. So I need your input on what I should see today.
I am very tempted to see The Substance.
You know what? That's what I was leaning towards. It's at 5 o'clock, so I was leaning towards that. I was either going to see that or I was going to go see Deadpool and Wolverine for a second time, just because I figured, you know what, I can kind of turn the brain off, and I've already seen it. So if I kind of miss stuff, it's not a big deal. But I have heard good things about The Substance, so I was kind of like, maybe I should go see that.
Yeah, that's probably the move. That's probably the move. But I want to let you get to it. I don't want to hold you up any longer. So I'm gonna hit you with this last question. And the last real question. I got four rapid fire questions for you. But here's the first one. Well, here's the last real question. This is more of a summation because there's a lot of jewels that have been dropped during this podcast, and this is one side of the things that you're known for. You're known for your art, but you're known for your insight. So, what advice would you give artists that are trying to like navigate sort of their creative path, a very unique creative path? Like, I'm doing something very original. Yeah, I'm doing something that has to sacrifice. I'm doing something that might be dark and is definitely not for everyone. What advice would you share?
It really comes down to finding yourself. And so with the content that I do, sometimes I may come across ridiculous. Sometimes it may seem stupid. Sometimes it may seem insightful, but it's just me kind of sharing the totality of who I am and putting myself out there. And I think that some people are connecting with that. Not everybody. I'm not for the masses. I don't think that I'll ever go super viral because I just don't think that that's who I am. And I don't think that's my place. But it's about finding yourself and being authentic to yourself. And it is okay if you don't know who you are, because I've been on this journey for a long time. And I'm still figuring out who I am, and I'm still changing. And I want to tell people that even when I give advice, I always tell people, when I give you advice, what I'm saying is not right or wrong. I'm just sharing my own story. So my truth is not going to be your truth. So maybe I share something and you say, well, I don't agree with that. Well, I can still help you, and that lets you know what you don't want. So I think that there are too many influencers out there, and there's too much BS and people pretending about, oh, take this formula. And there's a lot of videos about how to just go viral, but it's going viral for the sake of going viral. And there's no actual content that's being created. And I like to let people know, first and foremost, for me, I'm an artist over a content creator. And I think that if you just get back to the connection and being yourself, that you will find the right people. And I understand the draw of numbers and going viral and that validation, but that validation is fleeting, that it passes. And until you find that within, you'll never really be happy. And I still struggle with that. So I can't say that I'm happy all the time. I struggle big time with that. But I'm honest about it, and I hope to help some people.
That's a really good point, and I'll close on my 2 cents on that because I relate to that. And in the last year, being able to do the education thing and teaching young whippersnappers in the podcasting space, I was just like, just do something that feels like it's for you. Don't do the influencer thing. I was like, how many goofy entrapment, and entanglement podcasts, entanglement's the word. How many entanglement podcasts about Will Smith and Jada Pinkett were there in 2021? Don't do the thing. Be topical if that's what you're doing, but don't do something for the clicks or, it sometimes it's just like, you just got to be straight up and down about it. Don't do it for chasing the bag. Do something that matters to you, and the bag will come, quote unquote, or whatever that success metric will come. But sometimes the success metric is being able to do it and still being interested in doing it and enjoying the hustle and the grind of doing it versus, well, I hate what I do, but at least it went viral. Who cares? You still got to do it.
And people may not support you on the journey. Your friends may not support you. Your family may not support you. But you, at the end of the day, have to decide who you are, because you have to live with yourself. And can you live with yourself? Will you be happy with who you have become and what you have done?
That's a good point. And that's where we're closing the real questions. All right. Here's the rapid fire portion. This is the portion where everyone gets nervous. You're not nervous. You're a cool cucumber over there, so you're good.
I'm not nervous, but I feel like you might go like total curveball where this is something that I'm not at all expecting. But it is what it is. I mean, hey, that's the fun stuff. So if I get stumped, I get stumped.
No, you're going to be good. You're going to be good. These are all questions you can answer. Everyone can be able to answer. Oh, here's the first one. You mentioned earlier, I remember whenever it's like an alert. Whenever someone mentions Ninja Turtles, I got to ask them, who's your turtle?
Raphael, because he's got the attitude.
Okay, see again, this is why we're connecting here. See, when I was younger, it was Leonardo. When I became an adult, it was Raphael. If you ask my brother, he was like, "You were just both." And I was like, "They bump heads." He was like, "Exactly." Here's the next one. See, that was a very easy one. Here's the next one. What's one tool or material you could not create without? That's worded weirdly, but it's one material tool that you need to create that it's just like I can't do this without this one tool.
Soul. The greatest tool you can have is soul.
Love it. If your art had a soundtrack, what song would play on repeat?
Oh Jesus, it kind of changes by the day, but I'm really kind of into the hip hop stuff,
Yeah.
like and not like the mainstream hip hop, more of the underground hip hop type stuff with some substance to it.
Okay. All right. And this is one since you're out there in Cali, when in San Diego, you're based there. What is a surprising place or even a moment that you found inspiration that has shown up in your work?
I can't. So I'm going to answer this in kind of a weird way. I'm going to say the zoo.
Okay.
And the reason being is that the zoo is my comfort place. It's where I like to go, and I'm able to kind of ground myself and find myself. A lot of times I'm so close to it, I'll go over there and I'll just walk around for like 30 minutes, like a person would normally go for like an evening walk type thing. And I love animals. I know some of the animals at the zoo by name. And so it's just my place that I'm able to find myself and kind of get back to me.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I had one. I walk everywhere, and one that comes to mind, and it turned into a question that same day. I was in Austin the first time I got paid to leave Baltimore to do interviews in a different city. And I was just like, okay, there's some legs here. I like this. And it wasn't even the money thing. It was a validation marker, but it was one of those things of, I'm curious about this and I'm going to do it regardless. It'd be nice to be paid to do it, but I don't really care about it because the plane ticket's already booked. And while I'm just kind of exploring, going to coffee shops and all of that different stuff, I happen to be looking at a bumper sticker. It's 106 degrees. It's dumb hot. And I see this bumper sticker that reads, "Art is the new magic." And I immediately pulled out my notepad, which I always have on me, usually an ugly book or something like that. And I wrote it down. And I was just like, this is going to be an insight for a question. And I did it. I was down there to do, I think, 4 or 5 interviews. And that showed up in 2 interviews, that question. And it was just like, that's inspiration. That's an observation. There's something that showed up and I can do that through line. If I wasn't walking here, I wouldn't have had that question.
Yeah, absolutely. It's powerful too.
Absolutely. Well, that's kind of it. I think we covered a lot of ground. We got deep. We got in there. So there's 2 things I want to do. I want to thank you for coming on and spending some time with me. This has truly been a pleasure. I mean, it's always cool to connect. We got some overlap there, sir. So we'll be talking. And 2, I want to invite and encourage you to share with the listeners where they can check you out, check out your work, social media, website, all of that good stuff. The floor is yours.
I'm pretty easy to find. You can look me up by the name Michael Carini, Carini, also Carini Arts. I am Acrylic Alchemy on Instagram. I'm Carini Arts on Facebook. Hey, I'm also on OnlyFans because you got to do what you got to do. I'm only PG-13, but hey, when I first started my page, I can't tell you how many people clicked on that wondering what I was doing there. So I'm on, like, hey, as an artist, you got to get creative. I do the stuff that people are afraid to do. I do my own thing. I am unapologetic about it. I got some cool shirts. I got some artist support content. So just check out my link tree and you can find me, join me on this journey.
And there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Michael Carini for coming on to the podcast, the Acrylic Alchemist, for spending some time with us today. And for Michael Carini, I'm Rob Lee, saying that there's art, culture, and community in and around your neck of the woods. You've just got to look for it.